Fast food is usually all about quick bites and convenience, but some stories from behind the counter are far from tasty. From shocking accidents to horrifying attacks, the world of fast food has seen some truly disturbing deaths. These chilling incidents reveal the dark side lurking behind familiar golden arches and burger joints. The 1992-1993 Jack-in-the-Box E. coli outbreak stands as one of the most defining and sobering moments in modern food safety, a tragic reminder that something as ordinary as a fast food hamburger can become the center of a national emergency when safety standards slip, and the consequences were far more severe than anyone could have imagined at the time, especially considering how routine and harmless a burger meal is supposed to be. The outbreak began when undercooked beef patties contaminated with E. coli 0157H7 were served at multiple Jack-in-the-Box locations across Washington, California, Idaho, and Nevada. And what should have been a simple oversight, burgers not cooked to the proper temperature, spiraled into a public health disaster that left 4 young children dead and more than 600 people seriously ill. Parents who thought they were buying their children a quick lunch instead found themselves in hospital rooms watching doctors fight to stop kidney failure, severe dehydration, internal bleeding, and complications from a pathogen most people hadn't even heard of at the time. And the emotional impact of those days still echoes through interviews and reports even decades later. Investigators eventually discovered that not only were the patties contaminated before reaching the restaurants, but Jack-in-the-Box also failed to update their cooking procedures in line with new federal guidelines that required higher internal temperatures to kill harmful bacteria. A combination of oversight and outdated policy that created the perfect storm for contamination to reach customers. As the story gained national attention, the outbreak became a symbol of what happens when food regulations don't evolve fast enough and when companies underestimate the importance of strict safety protocols. And it wasn't long before government agencies and industry leaders realized that major reforms were needed to prevent anything like this from happening again. Lawsuits began piling up, news outlets ran nightly updates, and families devastated by loss pushed for stronger accountability, turning their grief into advocacy that would ultimately reshape the entire American food safety system. The aftermath led to sweeping reforms, including the introduction of the Hazard Analysis and Critical Control Points (HACCP) system in meat processing, more rigorous inspection standards, and the official classification of E. coli 0157H7 as an adulterant in ground beef, which meant that any presence of the bacteria would automatically render the meat illegal to sell. These changes weren't just administrative adjustments. They marked a cultural shift in how the meat industry viewed safety, placing prevention at the forefront instead of reaction. Over time, the outbreak became a case study in public health programs, food science classes, and regulatory training sessions, serving as both a warning and a lesson in the high stakes of food handling. And while fast food chains have since improved their cooking guidelines, thermometer use, and staff training, the event remains a reminder of how fragile trust can be and how essential transparent, well-enforced safety standards are for something as universal as the food supply. Today, when people talk about the Jack-in-the-Box outbreak, they're not just retelling a tragedy. They're acknowledging the pivotal moment when the country realized that invisible pathogens can have very real consequences, and when the loss of 4 children forced an entire industry to rethink how it operates, making the event one of the most transformative, though heartbreaking, turning points in the history of food safety. On July 18, 1984, a seemingly ordinary Wednesday afternoon at a McDonald's restaurant in San Ysidro, San Diego, turned into one of the deadliest mass shootings in U.S. history. The San Ysidro McDonald's massacre, as it would come to be known, shocked not only the local community but also the nation, highlighting the terrifying reality of random acts of violence in public spaces. A gunman entered the restaurant carrying multiple firearms and began shooting indiscriminately at customers and employees, leaving chaos and terror in his wake. By the time the police had confronted him, 21 people had been killed and 19 others wounded. ranging from young children to elderly patrons, each with lives abruptly and tragically changed in an instant. The attack, which lasted 77 minutes, was not just a burst of violence but a prolonged siege, during which terrified survivors hid under tables, fled through back doors, or tried desperately to protect loved ones. The police response involved careful planning, negotiation attempts, and ultimately a sniper who ended the ordeal. But the human cost had already been inflicted, leaving a permanent scar on the community. Families and neighbors were left in shock, struggling to process the sudden loss and the randomness of the violence. The massacre forced a national conversation about gun control, the warning signs of violent behavior, and the responsibilities of law enforcement to respond swiftly and effectively to such tragedies. It also highlighted the profound psychological impact on survivors, witnesses, and first responders, many of whom suffered long-term trauma, nightmares, and anxiety after that day. Survivors have recounted their experiences, reflecting on the split-second decisions that saved their lives, the terrifying moments of uncertainty, and the extraordinary acts of bravery by strangers helping one another amid the chaos. Memorials and remembrances have been held to honor the victims, serving both as a tribute and a somber reminder of the consequences of unchecked violence. The incident also exposed vulnerabilities in public safety, prompting discussions about emergency exits, security measures in public places, and the need for rapid communication between law enforcement and civilians during crises. Over the years, it became a case study in emergency response, mental health support, and community resilience, influencing how authorities prepare for and respond to similar events. Even decades later, the San Ysidro McDonald's massacre resonates in public consciousness as a reference point in the study of mass shootings and their societal impact. It is a stark illustration of how ordinary spaces can suddenly become sites of unimaginable horror, leaving indelible emotional and social scars. The lessons learned extend far beyond San Ysidro, echoing across the nation in policies, debates, and ongoing efforts to prevent similar tragedies. It remains a sobering reminder of the fragility of life, the randomness of tragedy, and the resilience of human beings in the face of extreme adversity. While the names and faces of those lost are preserved in news reports, documentaries, and survivor accounts, the broader significance lies in understanding the human cost behind statistics, the courage displayed during the crisis, and the continuing struggle to create safer communities. Ultimately, the San Ysidro McDonald's massacre is not just a historical event but a profound reminder of the consequences of violence, the importance of preparedness, and the enduring impact on everyone touched by such a devastating act. In the quiet town of Speedway, Indiana, on the night of November 17, 1978, a routine closing shift at the local Burger Chef fast food restaurant turned into a nightmare that would haunt the community for decades. 4 young employees, barely out of their teens, Jane Freet, the assistant manager at 20, Ruth Shelton, 17, and 16-year-olds Daniel Davis and Mark Flemons simply vanished without a trace. At first glance, it seemed like a minor case of teen mischief or a botched late-night robbery. Only about $581 was reportedly missing from the safe, and the restaurant was left mostly undisturbed, with purses, jackets, and even coins remaining behind. Yet, something about the scene did not add up. The back door was ajar, and the safe had been opened, but the careful nature of the act and the small amount of money taken hinted at a far more sinister motive. As the hours passed and the employees failed to show up, concern grew, but the gravity of the situation would only become horrifyingly clear 2 days later, when hikers discovered the bodies of all 4 victims in a wooded area of Johnson County, Indiana. Each had died violently in a different manner. Freet was stabbed, Shelton and Davis shot, and Flemons suffered blunt force trauma, suggesting a brutal, chaotic, and deeply personal crime rather than a simple robbery. The investigation that followed was plagued with missteps and lost opportunities. Law enforcement initially underestimated the seriousness of the disappearance, thinking the teens had simply wandered off or been caught in some juvenile misadventure. The restaurant was cleaned the next morning, destroying crucial evidence that might have helped identify the perpetrator. Photographs of the scene were not taken, and the little forensic evidence that remained proved frustratingly insufficient. Witness reports indicated that 2 men had been seen loitering outside the restaurant before closing, yet these leads never produced a definitive suspect. Over the years, investigators explored countless theories, including the possibility that one of the victims had recognized someone and triggered a violent response, or that the perpetrators had a more personal motive beyond robbery. Multiple confessions were made, including one by a man named Donald Forrester, who later recanted, leaving authorities with tantalizing clues but no convictions. Despite advancements in forensic science and periodic reinvestigations, the case remains frustratingly unresolved, leaving families and the community with lingering questions and grief. Part of what makes the Burger Chef murders so chilling is the ordinary nature of the setting and the victims. These were not people involved in criminal activity or dangerous situations. They were teenagers working late to earn a paycheck and move through life. Their deaths were sudden, violent, and utterly senseless, a stark reminder that tragedy can strike even in the most mundane moments. The case has also become emblematic of the frustrations of law enforcement at the time, a cautionary tale about missed opportunities and the consequences of underestimating the seriousness of a situation. Today, the original Burger Chef building has been demolished, but the case continues to capture public attention, partly due to documentaries such as The Speedway Murders, which examine the events in painstaking detail, interview surviving witnesses, and explore new leads that might yet solve the case. The story of Jane, Ruth, Daniel, and Mark is both a historical footnote and a somber reflection on vulnerability, violence, and the persistent human need for justice. Even decades later, their disappearance and deaths are remembered not just as a shocking crime, but as a lesson in vigilance, empathy, and the enduring impact that a single tragic night can have on a community. In a sense, the Burger Chef murders have transcended their immediate horror to become part of Indiana's collective memory, a chilling story that reminds everyone of the fragility of life, the unpredictability of violence, and the importance of never letting cases like this fade into obscurity, because remembering the victims is a small but meaningful step toward honoring their lives and the promise of answers yet to come. On May 7, 1992, the small town of Sydney River, Nova Scotia, was shaken to its core by a crime that would haunt the community for decades. The scene was a McDonald's restaurant, a place usually associated with burgers, fries, and casual family outings, now transformed into a site of unimaginable horror. 3 armed men entered the restaurant in the late afternoon, one of whom was an employee with knowledge of the store's operations. Their objective was simple: rob the safe. What unfolded, however, was far from ordinary. In the course of the robbery, the perpetrators shot and killed 3 employees, ending lives in a sudden violent moment that left families and neighbors reeling. The fact that one of the attackers was someone who worked behind the counter compounded the tragedy, highlighting how trust and familiarity can be exploited in devastating ways. The incident was not only a loss of life, but a profound breach of security in a setting that was supposed to be safe and routine. The murders had an immediate and lasting impact on McDonald's policies and the perception of workplace safety. Corporations and small business owners alike were forced to reconsider their approach to security and employee training. Time delay safes, stricter cash handling protocols, and increased surveillance became essential measures in restaurants across Canada. Employees were trained to prioritize personal safety over property and to remain vigilant for signs of suspicious behavior. Background checks and attention to internal risks became standard practice, recognizing that insider knowledge could pose a significant threat. Beyond the physical measures, the Sydney River tragedy also prompted discussions on how to manage and respond to violent crimes in public spaces, shaping protocols that balanced efficiency, security, and the well-being of staff. The social impact of the crime extended far beyond policy changes. In Sydney River, the community grappled with grief, fear, and the unsettling reality that such violence could occur in a seemingly ordinary environment. Families mourned the loss of loved ones, while neighbors struggled to process the randomness and severity of the act. Media coverage amplified the shock, bringing national attention to the case and highlighting issues of workplace violence, criminal behavior, and the vulnerabilities of public spaces. Legal proceedings followed, with the perpetrators eventually apprehended, tried, and convicted, bringing a measure of justice, but the scars remained. For many, the memory of that day serves as a somber reminder of the fragility of safety and the profound consequences of crime. Even decades later, the Sydney River McDonald's murders are remembered as one of the darkest moments in Canadian criminal history. They represent a convergence of ordinary life and extreme violence, showing how quickly routine can be shattered by deliberate acts of brutality. The tragedy reshaped not only local attitudes towards security, but also influenced broader approaches to protecting employees and the public in workplaces nationwide. While the town has moved forward, the legacy of that day persists in policies, community awareness, and the collective memory of those who were touched by the events. It is a story that underscores the need for vigilance, the importance of comprehensive security measures, and the enduring human impact of crime, reminding us that even the most mundane settings can become the stage for extraordinary tragedy. April 16, 1994, started out like any other day at the Popeyes in Gadsden, Alabama, but it ended in a tragedy that would haunt the town for years. The restaurant, usually a lively spot filled with the smell of fried chicken and the chatter of employees and customers, became the scene of a violent crime so shocking it still sends chills down the spine. That day, two robbers decided to turn a routine robbery into something horrifying. They forced 4 employees into a freezer, a cold, claustrophobic space that would become the site of an unthinkable act. In the blink of an eye, the sounds of laughter and sizzling chicken were replaced with the chaos of gunfire and terror. 3 of the employees were killed. Their lives ended in a moment of cruel violence, while 1 survived, trapped in a nightmare that would leave scars far beyond the physical. The survivor's account would later be crucial in bringing justice, providing details of the robbers' actions that law enforcement desperately needed. The crime itself was brutal, not just because of the killings, but because of the method. Forcing people into a freezer and then shooting them showed a level of premeditation and cruelty that shook the community. It wasn't just a robbery gone wrong. It was a deliberate, cold-blooded attack on innocent workers. The town of Gadsden, a relatively quiet place in northeastern Alabama, had never faced anything like this. Local law enforcement launched an intensive investigation, following every lead, interviewing witnesses, and eventually identifying the perpetrators. Among them was Robert Bryant Melson, whose actions would ultimately lead to the most severe punishment the state could impose. The legal proceedings were long and tense, as families of the victims, the surviving employee, and the wider community followed every development closely, hoping for a sense of justice amid the tragedy. Melson was convicted and sentenced to death, a reminder that certain crimes cross lines that society cannot tolerate. His execution years later served as a grim punctuation to the story, but it could never undo the trauma inflicted on the victims' families or the survivor, who had to carry the memory of that day forever. The Gadsden Popeye shooting also became part of a larger conversation about fast food security and workplace safety. Businesses began reevaluating how to protect employees, adding alarms, security cameras, and panic buttons, hoping to prevent similar tragedies. The case highlighted the vulnerability of workers in low-security environments and the devastating consequences when criminals act without regard for human life. Even decades later, the memory of that day lingers. It serves as a reminder that behind the everyday bustle of restaurants and retail spaces, real risks exist, and that acts of violence can change communities forever. It's a story of loss, survival, and justice, all wrapped up in a single horrifying event. While it's tempting to focus on the grisly details, the lasting impact lies in how communities respond, through remembrance, through policy changes, and through supporting survivors and families left in the wake of tragedy. The 1994 Popeyes shooting is not just a headline from history, it's a testament to resilience, the pursuit of justice, and the enduring hope that such horrors can be prevented in the future.